Welcome everyone to our very first product clinic. My name is John Zucker. I run our technical community, and with me I have John Gonzales, who will be our presenter and demo guy for this session on how to deploy Fabric Manager from the AWS Marketplace. I'm just going to level set on some logistics and quickly turn it over to John so he can dig into his content. So we are live here, and we do want this to be an interactive session. We do want to keep this at 30 minutes. We do have some flexibility to go a little bit over to answer additional questions. During the session, we do encourage you to ask questions. So all of you should see a question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and ask your question. We will do our best to answer all questions during this session. If we don't, everything will be answered in our hybrid public cloud group, which is in our GigaVUE community. So we'll take all the questions and answers asked during the session and post them there. And you will also have an opportunity to continue the conversation and ask any additional questions about this topic in the hybrid public cloud group. This session will be recorded, and we will also be posting the video on a new YouTube playlist that we will establish for all of our product clinics. At the end, there's just a very short survey asking for a little bit of feedback and your suggestions on future topics. So that's all I got for you in terms of logistics. It's pretty straightforward. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to John.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll share my screen, and I promise to not bore you with so many slides, because obviously the whole purpose of this session is for it to be more interactive. I want to be able to show how the solution works and how to actually deploy it. But I think it is important for everyone to know. So again, welcome everyone. This is our very first product clinic. And my name is John Gonzales, and I'm a technical success manager here at Gigamon. And the main focus for today is deploying the Fabric Manager from the AWS Marketplace. And I'm going to just skim through some of these presentation slides just because I want to get into the meats and potatoes of this session. But the main thing is I want everyone, before we get started, is to know what is a Fabric Manager, because some of you may have experience with Gigamon in the past and some of you may not, and this may be a completely new area for some of you. And so the Fabric Manager, what does it do? So here's this slide that kind of covers some of those high-level points as to what the Fabric Manager does. The Fabric Manager is basically a GUI interface that users interact with, and the Fabric Manager also gives users a centralized orchestration for all of their visibility infrastructures that are required for the Gigamon solution to function. And those are for both virtual and public cloud environments. And you can see some of those other visibility fabrics listed there, like vSeries, UCTV, and so on and so forth. Another added value for using the GigaVUE FM is that you have a single pane of glass to view and manage virtual cloud and physical Gigamon appliances, which is a really nice value add for the GigaVUE FM. The Fabric Manager also comes pre-installed with a bunch of different dashboards that you can use to create inventory reports, audit trails, cluster status, etc. They're also customizable, which is obviously a very nice feature for people to have and leverage. Additionally, the GigaVUE FM by default comes with a free trial license, and it's a volume-based license, and the capacity for that license is 1 terabyte throughput per day. And again, when I go through the deployment process of this, I will show you how you can identify your license, your throughput, and your capacity for that license. And just be aware that the license is only provided for 30 days, and that is of the initial installation date of the actual Fabric Manager. If you're looking to get a more longer-term license, obviously, please contact Gigamon Sales so that they can provide you with details on how to purchase that license. Another thing that's important is the method to deploy the Fabric Manager. So our Fabric Manager can be deployed in many ways. One of those ways is using automation, and you can see a few listed on the bottom right: Terraform, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, and so on and so forth. Another one is the vendor marketplaces, which is something we're going to cover as part of this presentation today. You can use the public cloud providers marketplace, and it'll walk you through the process to deploy the Fabric Manager. And honestly, this is probably one of the most preferred way because it's the easiest and it has a lot of flexibility as well. And then lastly is using AMIs. You can look for shared or public AMIs. You'll be able to find Gigamon there and deploy it that way. Lastly is the Fabric Manager gives you by default. So if you look at the table below, those are some of the minimum requirements for a Fabric Manager to be able to operate successfully in whichever infrastructure you're looking to deploy it in. And it gives you the ability to manage approximately 1,000 nodes with the Fabric Manager. And if you're looking to discover or manage more than 1,000 nodes, please reach out to your support team, your sales team, or your professional services team member if you're working with one, so that they can give you the correct t-shirt size to select when going through the deployment process of your Fabric Manager. And again, we'll touch a little bit more on that when we get to that portion of the demo. And lastly, I just want to cover that is this. So this is the entire Gigamon visibility fabric. And I know it looks like a lot, and I don't expect everyone to, again, really try and dissect what's going on here. The reason I share this slide is because the Gigamon Fabric Manager, which I'll start referring to as the GigaVUE FM or just simply FM. This gives you the ability to manage multiple cloud environments, whether it's private or public, and even hardware appliances. If you have any of those from Gigamon, you can manage those using one single Fabric Manager. And so here's what it looks like. But again, the focus for this, I want you to forget about everything that's down here because it's not going to be the focus of this presentation. It's only going to be the Fabric Manager. And with that, I think we can get started. I will share with John at the end of the presentation, and there's going to be a bunch of useful links, and all of these will cover most of the information that I'm going to present to you today as far as prerequisites, the installation guide for the Fabric Manager. And if you're interested in the full cloud suite, which I showed in the previous slide, there's going to be links to that so you can reference them later if you'd like. All right, so I'm going to jump into the marketplace. For those of you that have used the AWS Marketplace or AWS in general, if you manage anything in AWS, you're pretty familiar with this screen. For those of you that are not, the AWS Marketplace is essentially the go-to location for you to be able to install specific instances with a specific vendor of choice. And in this case, it's going to be Gigamon software that's going to be installed in an EC2 instance that's going to be installing our Fabric Manager. So the process is pretty simple. The first thing is, and again, this is not going to be a session to teach you about how to navigate around the AWS portal. It's more about just deploying our solutions. If you have any questions about that, definitely feel free to reference those links that will be shared after this call. But also, if you have some specific questions, I can try to answer them if time allows at the end. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is when we get to the marketplace, we just want to type in the word Gigamon and hit enter. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you a bunch of results that Gigamon has posted inside the AWS Marketplace. All of them have their own unique name. And again, as you saw in the screenshot that I shared earlier in my PowerPoint slide, we do have multiple visibility fabrics or instances that can be deployed. But in this case, our main focus is going to be the Fabric Manager. And in order to do that, it doesn't say it in the name, but it's the GigaVUE Cloud Suite BYOL version. There are a couple other versions that are very similarly named, like the Cloud Suite, and it has a specific allowance per day. But in this case, we're not going to focus on those. The difference between these two is just essentially how the licensing is being purchased. If you do a BYOL, which stands for Bring Your Own License, this means you purchase the license from Gigamon, and all that you're going to be paying Amazon essentially is for hosting those instances. If you decide to go with one of the other options that's not the BYOL option to deploy Fabric Manager, you are responsible for paying a bit of a premium for that Gigamon software license. And you can see the numbers if you're interested in seeing how much that'll cost you if you decide to do it through them. But in all honesty, I think it's a better option to go with the BYOL version. It's a bit cheaper. And you have two options to identify it. You can go to the left by selecting one of the filters, for bring your own license, and this will filter down your search even further. And then you'll just select the very first one, which is BYOL version for Fabric Manager, and then just click it. One thing that is important to note, and here's also an indicator of this, is that you need to have access or permissions if you're logged into your AWS account to be able to subscribe to this software. If you do not have those permissions, you need to contact an administrator so that they can subscribe to this specific product or the software in the AWS Marketplace before you can proceed. If you do have the permissions, you can just simply hit continue to subscribe and it'll take you there. But before I do that, I just want to scroll down a little bit and just show you the costing if you're interested in seeing that in the future. Like I mentioned, the BYOL version, there is no software cost associated to it because the license is something that you've purchased directly from Gigamon. But if you decide to go down the route of purchasing it through AWS, there is that option as well, and it'll give you a breakdown and you'll be able to see that. And the nice thing about it too is you can see that the EC2 instance that's required for a Fabric Manager to successfully run in your environment is starred, and it says vendor recommended. So this is what we recommend, an M4 extra large. And if you hover over that, you'll be able to see the actual instance type details. So that way you have that information available at your disposal. And here's where you will select the region that you would like to deploy that specific instance. And again, every region is available. It's just depending on your specific use case as to where you would like to deploy the EC2 instance. This you don't have to touch. This is pre-populated by the selection from the marketplace, so there's no need for us to further modify anything else. And then from here, we'll just go to the top right and hit continue to subscribe. And this takes you to the section where theoretically you would subscribe to the software, but in this case, I'm already subscribed to it. And as you can see, here's the date where that was made effective. So it's been a little while since we've subscribed to this. But if you are not subscribed to it, you would just essentially select a checkbox and then it'll automatically subscribe. Be aware that when you go through the subscription process, it could take roughly about 1 to 5 minutes for it to take effect. So don't panic or worry if you don't see the option or this doesn't illuminate to allow you to continue to the configuration. All right, so in this case, we'll continue to configure. And then here's where we get into configuring some of those details. And I know we selected it in the previous window, but in case you missed it, you can now change or modify the region based on your specific needs. The fulfillment option is something that you're not going to touch. Is already pre-selected or pre-configured for you from the selection made from the AWS Marketplace. Now, software version. This is pretty important. If you're new to Gigamon, I would highly recommend always deploy the latest and greatest. But if there is a specific requirement within your organization, definitely feel free to select one of the other options that are here. And if you're looking to select an older version, again, I would recommend reaching out to support or even working with our professional services team to see if they can maybe help you make a determination on what's the best fit for your organization. But for me, my recommendation is always to go with the latest and greatest because it'll always contain the most recent bug fixes and feature enhancements that are made to the software. Okay. And then after you've selected that, we're going to hit continue to launch. And here's where all the details are pertaining to this specific instance that's about to be deployed. And you have a couple options to choose from. I mentioned a few of them earlier, which is using an AMI. You can save it to the service catalog and deploy that way. You can launch through EC2 as well, and you can launch from the website, which is exactly what we're doing. And when it means website, it just basically means the AWS Marketplace. So I'm going to leave it selected as that option, and that automatically gets pre-populated when you selected it from the Marketplace. But if you decide to change your mind and go a different route, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Now, EC2 instance type, again, this is pre-populated. I'm not going to change it. This is the default, and this is more than enough for at least up to 1,000 nodes that you're looking to manage. VPC settings and subnet settings. Again, I won't bore you with all of this. This is all AWS specific configurations for your specific organization. You can either create a new VPC, which is nice because it gives you the hyperlink here where you can click on it and create a new VPC specifically for this Fabric Manager. or you can select one that's already within the area that you're looking to manage or deploy the visibility fabric. And again, it doesn't matter where in what VPC the Fabric Manager is deployed. You can use it to manage multiple VPCs as long as that user that's used for Fabric Manager has the appropriate permissions to access those VPCs. And then the same thing goes for subnets. You can select whatever subnet you have in your environment. I'm selecting this one here, and it's as simple as that. Now, the security group settings. Now, this is pretty important because this will determine whether or not you will be able to access the Fabric Manager GUI. I already have a few already pre-configured, but if you do not, for the sake of this demo, I'm going to create a new one based on the seller settings. And I think this is a cool feature because it already tells you what connections you're going to need by default in order for you to be able to SSH and establish a GUI connection to your environment. So we're going to create this new one, and I'm going to name the security group test 1. And let me just give it a description. I'll just call it clinic. And we'll hit save. And now it's refreshing the list, and it's created that new security group and automatically assigned it as part of the drop-down options. The last thing is the key pair settings. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, you have the option, if you saw based on the seller recommendations, there's an option to connect to the GUI using 443, but there's also an option to SSH into the box. And one way to do that is you need to have a key pair. And so what you can do is if you already have one, select one from the drop down, and that'll allow you to SSH into the appliance using that specific key pair. And if you don't have one and you want to create a new one that's specific to this Gigamon Fabric Manager appliance, you can do that. And it'll just go through the same process where it'll ask you to give it a name and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through that process now. I'm just going to select one that is here because I am not going to SSH into the box as part of this demonstration. I'm just going to deploy the Fabric Manager. So the last step is just to click launch. All right. And so you're met with this screen. And at the very top, it tells you that congratulations, an instance of this software is successfully deployed on EC2. And it gives you the AMI ID if you want to look for it. And then it gives you the ability for you to be able to just click the hyperlink and go look at the status in your AWS console to see how the deployment is progressing. And here you'll look at some of the configurations and usage instructions and so on and so forth. And if you want to deploy multiple Fabric Managers, you can do that at this point as well. With the exact same configuration, you can do that. And you'll just hit launch and it'll go ahead and perform that action. Be aware that I know certain organizations may have specific requirements, but for the most part, like the screenshot I shared at the beginning, one Fabric Manager can manage multiple public and private and even your physical appliances. But if you want to silo your deployment, for example, you have one Fabric Manager for everything pertaining to AWS, one Fabric Manager pertaining specifically to like Microsoft Azure, for example, you can deploy an instance in each one of those environments. So it's not specific that you have to have one Fabric Manager and do everything from there. And so now what we're going to do is click on EC2 console, and this will open up the EC2 console. Okay. And all I'm going to do here is just look for this specific AMI to see if I can find the instance to see if it's being deployed. So this is my instance here. It's right here. So as you can see, I'm going to try and filter this list so it's easier on the eyes, so you don't have to see everything else. And there it is. So this is the instance here. As you can see, all of the variables that I selected during the configuration process have been set. And these are all the connection details for that specific EC2 instance. So this appliance is currently being initialized, and this is very important. Make sure to check the status. It could take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, and in some cases up to 15 minutes I've seen for the Fabric Manager instance to be fully deployed. And once this instance has been fully deployed, you can simply just grab the public IP address and then open up a browser, or you can just hit open address and it'll open up a new tab and it'll allow you to log in through the user interface of this appliance. I believe I deployed a Fabric Manager earlier just to avoid this time delay that it might take for this to deploy. So just give me a few seconds for me to see if I can find it. It looks like my instance got deleted, John.
It wasn't me.
Yeah. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time as well. I know obviously I have this instance that's running right here. That's the one we just kicked off. But unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to wait because that appliance looks like the one that I had stood up initially looks like it's been torn down somehow.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. And I guess at this time, since we're waiting for this, I want to maybe we can take some questions, John. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure. That's perfect timing. Thank you, John. That was really good. And we do have a fair number of questions. So what I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and ask the questions. I'm going to go in order. And I know there's some of you that have asked multiple questions as well. But let's go ahead and spend the next 5 minutes or so trying to answer as many as we can. So first one from Tom. Tom would like to know more about the scalability of Fabric Manager and the various Fabric components that it deploys in AWS. He also wants to know about Azure, and we might do a separate session just on Azure. But anyways, scalability, Fabric Manager, and the various components that deploy in AWS. In our documentation, it says that different instance types are supported, but he needs to know how he can find details about there's a note in the documentation that says additional instance types are also supported. So he needs to know what they are, essentially.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as far as adding additional or changing selecting a different instance type, as the note indicates there, because that can be a little bit of a sensitive subject, we don't post that information. So it's best for you to reach out to your support team. Honestly, submitting a ticket is the best method for you. If there's a specific instance type that you're looking to use because maybe it's newer, it's more performant, and obviously, as all of you are aware, AWS changes their instance types pretty frequently. And so keeping that up to date can be very challenging. That's one of the reasons why we ask you to reach out to your support team for an answer on that. And as far as scalability, I know I mentioned that at the beginning, the default instance type that gets assigned to it, it allows you to manage up to 1,000 physical nodes. But if your use case is higher than that, where you need, let's say, 2,000 or even more, you're able to do that with a Fabric Manager, but you will need to do a little bit more of horizontal scaling to be able to accomplish that. And in our documentation, we can share the link as well. There is a little section in there that talks about the horizontal scaling. But as always, if you're planning to do that, and if you have an environment that requires that many of physical devices or appliances to be managed by a single or a highly available setup of Fabric Manager, definitely reach out to your support team for guidance, and or if you don't have one already, work with your professional services expert so that they can assist you with that.
All right, next question from Peter is Peter's looking for details around how to automate the deployment of FM.
Mhm. Yeah, right now, as far as automation, as far as I know, and maybe this is something that we can take back, John, just to get more details on, we don't really publicly share a lot of information on how to automate the deployment of the Fabric Manager. Usually what happens is if a customer is looking to deploy our solution using automation, I know our professional services team definitely does have scripts that they can provide so that you can accomplish that. But as far as like us having something that's public facing, I don't believe that we do. So we'll take that back and see if we can get an answer for you.
Okay. Next question from Patrick. I think it's around regions. And he's looking for, and hi, Patrick. I know Patrick. He's up in Canada. So he's looking for the Calgary CAEST-1 doesn't appear to be an option.
Okay, we can take a look at that. So let's mark that one for answer it later, and we can share. And I don't know if John mentioned this at the beginning, but if there are any questions that we need to respond to after the fact, He will be sharing that on the community portal. I'm not sure if he can tag a specific individual so that the answer makes it to that specific person.
So that I can answer that question real quick. If you're a member of the Vue community and it's really easy to join, I'll tag you in the answers. They'll be available publicly in the group. But if you are a member, I'll make sure to tag you so you'll get notified. All right, here's another question from Tom, and it is, what are the scalability limits of each component? And I guess on one of your slides, your deck said 1,000, so he's assuming that it's V-series nodes for FM. So it says your deck says 1,000. I assume V-series nodes for FM.
That's correct. Yeah, it's V-series nodes, and also if you have any physical Gigamon equipment, those also count towards that 1,000 limit.
Okay.
And again, as far as this is great questions, and I just want to let the audience know as well that if they are interested, because it sounds like there's questions about the not just the Fabric Manager, but also the other components to our visibility solution, definitely submit this as a suggestion as to what we should talk about. Again, this is our very first one, but as far as the episode 2, 3, and so on and so forth, we can definitely talk about those components and take a deeper dive.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that there's interest in Azure from the questions. There's also interest in Nutanix as well. Okay, so I think that we're at the bottom of the hour. I'm going to wrap up here, and there's some outstanding questions that we will answer. So I'm going to take over and just close with one slide in terms of follow-up. But thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
Where is
Just
my
one thing I will add, John, just
oh,
for
sure.
so that we're just to close off this whole experience. But I know, unfortunately, it didn't load, and my other system it wasn't already fully deployed. But this is essentially the entire process. The only thing that's left is for this instance to be fully stood up and everything to be processed on the backend, and then we just log into the user interface. I was going to log into the user interface to show you what that looks like, but obviously we can save that for a separate session, maybe when we talk about dashboards as well. But that process that I outlined just now is all you need in order for you to deploy our Fabric Manager using the AWS Marketplace.
Awesome.
All right, handing it back over to you, John.
All right, sounds good. Okay. As we mentioned, we'll get all these questions, both the ones that we have answered and the ones that are unanswered, and post them in the hybrid public cloud group, which is in the Vue community. If you're not a member, just go to community.gigamon.com and you can join. It's very easy to join. The nice part about doing that is we can continue the conversation. So if you have additional questions about this topic or any other of our products or use cases, best practices, what have you, around hybrid public cloud deployment. So I've mentioned the group. Because it's a community, you can ask additional questions. We can continue the conversation around cloud. When you do exit, I mentioned at the beginning, when you do exit the webinar, short survey, how did it go? What do you think? Suggestions, comments, and if there are other topics that you would like us to deep dive on in future product clinics, we would love to get that input from you. Our plan is to do one of these every month, round about the same time. So at the end of every month, we'll bring on John and some of our other subject matter experts to do similar types of deep dive sessions on our products. If you have any questions for me directly, you can send me an email at community@gigamon.com. And with that, again, thank you so much, John. You did a fantastic job. Thank you, everyone, for attending our first product clinic. We're excited to continue doing these. And with that, we'll go ahead and close things off and end the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. With the Fabric Manager status now showing 2 out of 2, saying that all the checks have passed, the Fabric Manager is now fully deployed and it's ready for me to be able to log in. So one way you can do that is by either copying the IP addresses and typing it into a new tab, or you can just simply type in open address and this will open up a new tab for you. And you're going to be met with the login screen for your Fabric Manager. One thing to be aware of, the Fabric Manager is already pre-configured with a default username and password. So the default username is admin, and the password will be different for every deployment of Fabric Manager in AWS. So the password is actually your instance ID. So you can just hit this little copy icon here, move over to the tab back to your Fabric Manager, paste that there, and you're able to just log in. And once you log in, the first page you're going to be met with is this welcome screen. You just hit next on the bottom right, and then you'll be able to see the terms and conditions for using our product. If you want to read them, feel free to do so, and then just hit I accept the terms, and then just hit agree. And then next screen, you're going to actually have to change your password, and this is more for security reasons. Remember, the current password that's set by default is your instance ID. And again, you can find that by looking at the EC2 in your AWS workspace. So I'm just going to type in a random password just to make it easy. And what happens here is once you hit OK, and obviously you have to make sure you satisfy the password requirements, but once you hit OK, and this will automatically log you out. And once you're signed out, you have to sign back in using your new password. So we'll type this in and type in the new password that I configured. And once you do that, you are met with the Fabric Manager's homepage. And this is the dashboards view. You can see some dashboards here, and I talked about these in my presentation earlier, but you can select from all these different dashboards that we have. And that's basically all it takes to deploy the Fabric Manager. The only thing I will touch on just a little bit is licensing. So if we go to settings, under settings, system licenses, you select this and you go on the top left for FM Cloud and VBL Active, which is volume based. You'll be able to see the license that I talked about in my presentation earlier, which shows you the trial license. And this tells you the capacity or the volume that's allowed to pass through on a daily basis for this appliance. And as you can see, it gives you the start date and end date. Just be aware that there is no grace period. So once this license expires, and if you don't apply a new one, any configurations that you have set inside your Fabric Manager will automatically be wiped out. And that's all it takes to deploy the Fabric Manager using the AWS Marketplace. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, please post those in the community portal, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much.